Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 3 of the Chet Airliner podcast. This is going to be another book-isode. I'll try to make some visuals for this episode. Video production isn't something I've ever put any effort into learning, but even some still images might be preferable to the checkerboard thing that seems to be generated by the software that I use to get this into an acceptable format for a YouTube upload. I welcome any feedback anyone may have. You may comment below or email me at the address I'll provide in the description. Off the top of my head, I think it's chetairliner@gmail.com. Can't believe no one took that. I think it makes sense to chime in on any news or updates on things that I've covered in the past. For example, I'm excited to go see the new Alex Garland movie that's coming out soon. He's the person that directed the film adaptation of Annihilation, which I discussed in the previous episode. His new movie is titled Civil War, and he has stated that it is the last movie he wants to direct for the foreseeable future. Apparently, making movies is a pain in the ass, and he'd rather just write. An understandable position to take. We'll see if he follows through. Good for now. In the interest of time, let's move along to the main event. I want to talk about the fiction novels by Charles Soule. Soule being spelled S-O-U-L-E. This man has 3 novels to date. The Oracle Year from 2018. His second novel is titled Anyone, and that was from 2019. And his most recent book is called The Endless Vessel, and that was published less than a year ago in 2023. Soule has also written several graphic novels and dozens of comics for Marvel and DC. He was also a lawyer before he was a published writer. He graduated college with a major in Chinese language and a minor in music composition. You know, the usual. His career and creative output is massive, and it truly seems like he is only getting started. But here, I just want to discuss his 3 novels and my experiences with them, both for the sake of time and also because I have only read his novels and part of one of his original graphic novels. And the only reason I didn't finish that graphic novel, which was titled Letter 44, is that it was due back at the library. But I do hope to revisit it because the premise was very interesting. I first heard of Charles Soule because his first novel was recommended by Colin Wright on his podcast called Let's Know Things. I will put a link in the description to Colin's podcast. I strongly recommend that you check it out. It is incredibly well done. At the end of each episode of Let's Know Things, Colin makes a recommendation, often for a book, but not always. And it is through Colin's recommendations that I have discovered many of my now favorite authors. Truly, I cannot recommend Colin's work highly enough. That digression aside, here's what I love most about these books. Charles Soule has terrific ideas. These stories all take place in the world we live in, wherein a technology, a person, or a group of people, or a force of nature proves to be very disruptive to society at large. The changes and their impacts aren't all realized or revealed all at once. It feels very real and very plausible. The pacing of these stories is such that it tends to be steady enough that as a reader, my mind doesn't wander. There was very little that I was able to predict as a reader, and as a consequence, the revelations and twists, they all landed very solidly for me. There were many, oh yeah, of course, moments for me. Something happens and I realize that, right, that would definitely be an issue if such and such a thing were really happening. To me, it shows how well thought through the book's premises are. I love it when that happens, with any book. I'll discuss other works on future episodes where I had similar experiences with other authors. It takes more than ideas, though, and Soule's writing skills are very strong. The dialogue is tight, believable. The descriptions are effective without being verbose. From a literary standpoint, I would say these 3 books are equally good. But they are different enough that I would recommend them differently to different people. Now I'll talk about the 3 books in order of their publication. I went into The Oracle Year blind, not knowing anything about it other than what would be in a 1-sentence summary. Again, I found this book because Colin Wright recommended it. Here is a mere excerpt from the description of the book on Charles Soule's website. It follows.
Knowledge is power. So when an unassuming Manhattan bassist awakens from a dream one morning with 108 predictions about the future in his head, he rapidly finds himself the most powerful man in the world. Protecting his anonymity by calling himself the Oracle, he sets up a heavily guarded website with the help of his friend to announce his revelations.
Much more happens than that in the story, obviously, but I want to leave it at that. And leave it up to you if you want to read more about it in advance, or just take a chance on the book. I listened to the audio version of the book, and I've recently revisited it in the same format for the sake of talking about it here, because it has been some time, and I wanted it to be a little more familiar or fresh in my head. The narrator of that audiobook does an excellent job, which always adds nicely to the experience of a story. The main character felt very real, very believable. I'd like to think that that's due to him being well written and not just because of our demographic overlap. There are multiple perspectives in the book, which rotate with the chapters, something that I often enjoy very much in books. It can prevent monotony and make chapter end cliffhangers that much more effective because the next chapter is going to involve someone else and not this thing that just happened to this person who you care about. The tone of this book is light, but not in a cheap or vapid way. There's a lot of humor imbued in the story and in its dialogue. This book was thought-provoking and it solidified Soule as an author that I will continue to read, at least until he blows it big time. That brings us to his second novel, called Anyone. This book happens to be my favorite of his. I originally read Anyone in text form, and I recently listened to the audiobook to revisit it again for the sake of this episode. The audio is rock solid. The narrator, named Emily Wu Zeller, does a fantastic job portraying a wide variety of characters. I feel like I'm glad I read the text first. It allowed the audio to spring to life that much more because I was already familiar with the story, although I didn't remember the ending. Anyone, the book, is hard to even describe without giving something away. I do strongly recommend that if you are to check this one out, you do so with as little foreknowledge of the plot as possible. With that in mind, I'll describe this as vaguely as I can. There are 2 separate narratives in this book. One takes place, quote, now, and the other is 25 years from now. The now portion likely refers to roughly the time that this book was published, December of 2019. In that present day part of the story, there's a scientist working to develop treatments for Alzheimer's disease. Along the way, a different technology is inadvertently discovered that changes the world forever. Those changes are seen in full force in the 25 years later timeline, where a different principal character is working towards an unknown goal with motivations that are, for a while, and actually for a long while, beautifully and excruciatingly mysterious. This book is such a ride. Soule clearly spent a lot of time thinking it through and imagining how things could be transformed by the innovation that is at the core of this story. It's the unexpected things that pop up or are offhandedly mentioned that are the most fun for me. Just imagine when the internet was invented, which was in the beginning a way for major academic centers to exchange information. The people working on that project did not foresee Facebook. And yet, here we are. It is the unintended outcomes of tech innovations that are often the most impactful and disruptive. The sci-fi/tech elements of it aside, the overarching story and the characters, especially the characters, are great. So, no pressure and no judgment, but Anyone is a 9 out of 10, a total recommend from me. If you don't read this book, you really have to take a hard, honest look at your life choices. Because they're bad. His newest book is called The Endless Vessel. I will give a very brief description of how the book starts to at least give you a foundation. But as always, I urge you to go into this as blind as you can, because this book has a lot of very rewarding surprises. In brief, this book starts out just a few years in the future. It doesn't specify exactly when, but it does acknowledge COVID in passing. Just once, I think, so that we know that it has already happened. There is a new and poorly understood pandemic happening in this story. There's a plague of sorts that is called the Gray. No clear infectious agent has been identified, but it's known to be contagious. People afflicted with the Gray experience different things, ranging from crippling depression to a nihilistic flavor of euphoric mania that provokes antisocial behavior due to a belief that there is no future worth fighting for, and we just need to be as happy as possible right now. Given that the Gray is poorly understood, the risk factors for contracting it are also poorly understood. There is one specific way that is guaranteed to give someone the Gray. The ways to prevent it are less clear. One thing that seems to be true is that having a sense of purpose, connection, and community is protective against coming down with the Gray. The main character is named Lily Barnes. She is an adult who's working towards climate change mitigation. She encounters a piece of technology that seems to be far more advanced than anything has any right to be, and the story unfolds from there. This book is truly, literally, epic in its scope. It takes twists and turns that I never would have expected. It starts out in a way that felt, to me, like a Charles Soule book. More of what I love. Exactly what I showed up hoping to receive. But early on, the book takes a major left turn and is quite different for a very long time. But fear not. Everything will connect and resolve in a way that I doubt anybody will fully predict. But many, if not most people, will find very satisfying. I loved this story. It is without a doubt his most accomplished work, solidifying him as a major literary talent of our time, in my opinion. Thank you for joining me as I discuss these stories that have meant so much to me. Be well, my friends, and I will talk to you soon.